Hi, everybody. This is Ron Agresta. I lead a software development team here at SAS that focuses on data management technologies. And a big part of what we do is focus on connecting to data. So, no big surprise, that's the first step for a lot of our customers. And ultimately, what we're going to talk about here today is the fact that a lot of that data is moving to the cloud. So, is SAS ready for you? Absolutely, we are. And we're going to get into the details of how we support your journey to the cloud. So, many of you very likely have SAS analytics already at the heart of your organization. That's awesome. We help you solve problems that you couldn't solve before SAS. One of the big pieces there, though, is if you can't access the data, transform it, integrate it, you're in a tough spot. And we're going to focus a lot on the data aspect today. For those that know SAS for a long time, you'll be familiar with SAS's data step. You'll be familiar with SAS's analytic procs. That data step and proc 1-2 punch is a really important part of what made SAS so successful and you so successful. We're going to focus mostly on the data aspect of that as it sets you up for your analytic journey. So SAS has connectors to all kinds of different data sources. Here you see some representative ones. You'll see Oracle, BigQuery, Teradata, so on. We've got more than 30 named connectors, and we also support variants of those databases as well. So if there's a Postgres variant, our SAS access to Postgres supports that, as well as all the different types of Postgres in different locations. So there's a lot of connectivity here already. And if you're thinking about other third-party drivers, we have SAS access to ODBC, SAS access to JDBC, that expands really our connectivity to hundreds of sources rather than just 30, 40 or so sources. The other thing that I won't really cover too much today is the fact that SAS can also access different file types, different solution industry standard sort of sources, and data streams, and a lot of other things. We're not going to cover that so much today, but I didn't want to forget that part that really completes the full SAS connectivity story. We're mostly going to focus on some of the connectors and some of the associated SAS and database technology stack as well. So no surprise here, we had all those data sources and we support all of those things and have for many years. Those connectors support you already today. And as you move to the cloud, we support you there as well. So on the left, we've got Microsoft Azure, in the center, Amazon's AWS environment on the right, Google's cloud environment. Our Access products support you there if you've got, on the Azure side, something like Synapse Analytics, or SQL database. We support you if you have a third party in Azure, whether that's something like Cloudera or others. We've got you covered too. And the same story is there for Amazon. If Redshift is your thing or Google BigQuery is your thing, we're all set. We continue to make progress as well as on all three and adding new sources as we need to. And you can see below the line there on all three coming next, you'll see things like MongoDB and Databricks, and we're doing work in those areas. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that we support cloud environments away from the three main ones as well. So if Oracle, SAP, or Teradata are some of the cloud providers that you use, you're covered there too. Where we're going to spend a little bit of time today is focusing on Microsoft. It's an important technology partnership and marketing partnership for SAS. Last year, SAS and Microsoft joined forces and decided to do integration across a number of different technologies. You can see there in the center on the left, things like Azure Dynamics 365, Microsoft 365, the Power Platform. But really at the beginning of all that is the need to connect to data. And SAS already connects to a lot of different Azure data sources, and we'll continue to add those. But that's really the heart of the partnership for the data management side of things, where my world is to make sure that you can connect to the sources you need to do your downstream reporting, analytics, decisioning, and so on. So just to name a few examples here, you can see SAS access to SQL Server, top left there, it's represented by MS SQL or Postgres, MySQL, and other things. We already have you covered for the different Azure targets like PostgreSQL, Azure's database for MariaDB, and so on. So these work just like they would normally for your SAS environment. If you've got SAS running in this in Microsoft Azure, you can connect to these and use all the techniques that you're used to using. Likewise, if you go a little bit beyond some of the relational sources, you look at something newer like Microsoft's Azure Synapse Analytics environment, our SAS access to SQL Server supports that too. Our SaaS access to Hadoop supports HD Insight. And then a little bit different there on the top right, Azure Data Lake Storage, is the fact that we can connect to and use their object storage or file storage system in the way that you would use a file system natively in your on-premises deployment. So things like ORC and Parquet file types, CSV and others we support natively, and that's part of your data integration story as well. So we support you there in your ability to get to those data sources. So now let's take a little detour here. We're going to get into a demonstration to show you exactly how some of these things are going to work. So what I'm going to set up here, the premise is that we're going to have a SaaS VIA environment, and we're going to connect to a lot of different Azure data sources. And I'm going to pretend like I'm taking a trip maybe in a couple months. I don't know where yet. Maybe Greece, maybe Poland. Haven't figured it out, but I know once I'm there, I want to have a really good meal. So I want to take my family out. We've been cooped up for a while, and we want to make sure that we've got a good list of places to go. So I've got to connect to some data sources and show you and show where I'm going to pull this data from. And what I'm doing here as I'm building out this analysis of where to have my next great meal, my next trip, is building a connection to the different data sources that are available in Azure. In this case, we're looking at creating a connection to Azure Synapse Analytics. So this is one of Microsoft's newer analytic environments. I put the usual kinds of things in to connect to my data source. In this case, things like username and password, which is being enhanced, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I put in things like the schema and so on. And this is usually the first place, if you're in SaaS VIA, that you're going to start your journey. Connect to your data source, and then explore the data, transform the data, maybe report on it, or do some analytic modeling. So we've connected to Synapse Analytics there, and I'll expand out over here on the left and open the library there that I just created and show you that we've got access to data in this environment. So that's all great. We're ready to go. That's just one of the sources that we're going to look at. Here I've jumped over into SaaS Studio, and I'm going to do something very similar. So before I was connecting to a CAS-based library, a CASLib, they're called. Now I'm going to create a library reference, or a lib name, some people call them, to the same source on the traditional compute environment for SaaS. So that's called the compute server in VIA. Setting up the same kind of thing using SaaS access to SQL Server to connect to Azure Synapse Analytics and get access to my data. From there, I can read it into a process. I can write back to Synapse Analytics, and here you can see I'm just setting up some of the settings that are real typical. Throw in a schema name here to complete everything and hit OK. When I refresh the screen, you'll see that I now have access to all the tables. So we set up, just as a recap, we set up a library to a CAS target and or CAS runtime, and a library to a compute server runtime. So I may choose to use one or the other processing environments. Just depends on how my demo goes here. The other thing I want to do is start to get access to that the restaurant data. So I know over here in HD Insight on Azure, I've got access to Michelin star data, so Michelin restaurant data that's going to help me find the most interesting place to have dinner. So like I was working through the dialogues there a second ago, now I'm working at a code level, but doing the exact same thing. I'm creating a connection to Azure HD Insight, and there we will see that I've got access to this Michelin data there on the left. You can see Michelin 1, 2, 3. So that's 1-star, 2-star, 3-star data, and I want to find a good restaurant for my trip. So what I've done there is run a little bit of code, created a connection to Azure HD Insight, and then I just ran a little extra bit of code there to prove there on the right that I'm actually connecting over to the cloud, to this HD Insight Hadoop environment. So, so far I'm connected to two sources, Synapse Analytics, connected to HD Insight, and I'll use those as part of my demo that we're going to see here in the second part of the workflow that I build. But I want to connect to one more place just to show that I can do it. We want to connect to Azure Postgres, and this one's unique in there that I'm not going to put in a username password. We're integrated with Azure's Active Directory service so that I don't have to pass around usernames and passwords, and that's actually added to a lot of our Microsoft connections. I used a different method a second ago for HD Insights and others, but for this one I chose to use the integrated path there and didn't have to put in my username and password. So I just wanted to create another target. So you'll see this starts to make sense as I pull all this stuff together. I'm going to show you how I'm going to use these sources, either where the data is coming from or where we're going to store data. So if you're familiar with SAS Studio, this may be new to you. There's a flow environment now in SAS Studio, different from the coding, authoring perspective that's still there. Here we're going to build a flow that's going to transform, access and transform some of our data. So you see the Michelin 1, 2, 3 that were in our HD Insight. You can see a little elephant head there and the logo or in the icon that shows it's Hadoop. And it's easy enough to drag those things on, and I can create additional steps in this flow. If you're a SAS Enterprise Guide user or SAS Data Integration Studio user, this will look very familiar to you. This is where you do this kind of work in SAS Viya now. So I've connected to a couple different data sources, three different tables for this job. I'm going to stack those sources together, those target, or excuse me, the source tables, stack them together, and the output is going to be a temporary table inside my Postgres database, and that's that right icon there that has a little P there. It's the Michelin resulting table. So that's just one part of what I wanted to do. I pulled some data together, but now I'm going to run a different job that's going to start with the output of the first job, the Postgres table, and that's going to be the input to the next part of my process. And so I just wanted to, it's a little bit contrived, but I just wanted to show how we can connect all these different data sources and make sense of them. So let me flip back here to this other flow here that I built in SAS Studio. I've got a Postgres table on the left. In the middle, I'm just showing that I can run arbitrary SAS code here. I'm creating a concatenated column on the fly for some geocode information that I may choose to use for visualization downstream. And so that's that middle piece there. And then the branch rows is going to take an opportunity to put a filter on the data essentially and say, just give me only the restaurants that are located in Poland in the top right, and all the restaurants that that might be good candidates to go to that are based in Greece. And so if I look through the branch row dialog there, it gives me the ability to set my conditions there. The output of this process, those two tables, you can see it's a little SQL there, that is Synapse Analytics. So I went from HD Insight, a middle table, to Postgres, some more transformations, and we're going to put that in Synapse Analytics. So we're running this process right now. We'll end up with some new tables, and if I go look over here on the side, as I'm navigating around, we'll see some new tables appear. If I drill around here, and we'll see my Michelin Greece and Michelin Poland in my library there. So remember that, because we're going to get to a different process here, a different technology to show you what you can do with those downstream. So just proving again here that the table showed up. So as I transition to another new application, SAS Information Catalog, this is will be new to most users or most viewers here. This application actually lets me explore, discover, and make sense of the data that I'm connected to. So the first thing we need to do that is set up something that's called a discovery agent. The discovery agent uses the same connections I've already made to all the Azure sources, and it runs some code that goes and attempts to see what the data is all about. How big is it? How wide is it? What's the level of the quality? Is there personal information in there? All kinds of different things that will help me decide whether the data is appropriate for use, whether it's a reporting activity or some analytics that I want to do on it. So here I'm selecting that same Azure Synapse library. I'm creating an agent here. I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to run that. And it's going to take a little while to run, so we're going to transition to something else. But what it's doing behind the scenes is running some SAS code that's investigating the data, putting it in a repository that can be searched, and collecting a bunch of metadata about those sources and anything it finds in those sources, not just the tables that we looked at earlier. So while it's doing that, we're going to take a little bit of break from the Michelin scenario and jump out to something that's a little bit different, but I wanted to make sure that I covered it because I mentioned it in other parts of the presentation. We're going to connect to Azure Databricks. So that's a Spark-based environment for data transformation and analytics. It's available in Azure. SAS has connectivity to it, but we also have a little bit more than just connectivity to it. We can run SAS processes, SAS code, and SAS analytics inside Databricks. So the benefit there is we don't have to move any data around to actually do that. If we've already have data in the Spark environment in Databricks, we can actually move our processing over to that instead of moving data over to SAS, which is huge savings. So like we saw before, I need to create a library to connect to Databricks, and that's what the SAS code is doing right here. It's creating a new library to the Databricks environment. So that's step one of my process. And as we execute there, it's going to create a new library over here on the left. We'll see a new AZ Spark library just above my cursor. We're getting there. There it is. And in this environment, there's a bunch of data there already. And one of the things that I want to do is select or point out the fact that there is some big data there. There's a 50 million and a 500 million row table. I'm going to take that 50 million and remember that because I'm going to run some code against that. What I'm going to do is run some analytic code that's been developed elsewhere in SAS, in Model Studio most likely. And it's some scoring code that has been turned into an A-store, and that's just a way to consolidate the code that's related to that analytic model. I'm going to take that A-store model, put it inside Spark, and then execute the model against those 50 million rows. And so that's what that little bit of code there does. It's going to move the model over, initialize a bunch of things, execute the code, and then for every record, it's going to run the little bit of analytics and give a score. That score could be a credit score. It could be a next best offer kind of score. It just depends on the kind of analytics that we want to do. But that's what's going on behind the scenes now. We've actually moved some SAS processing over into Spark, which saved us a bunch because we didn't have to move the data around. So it's going to chug away a little bit on this, but it's important to note that those things go hand in hand. The connectivity and the in-database submission and processing go hand in hand. You need both of those to work together to make this happen. So that job ran, that Spark job ran against 50 million records. It just took about not quite 2 minutes to run. And at the end of it, if I were to investigate all those rows, I'd see 50 million rows, and they'll have a score that was appended to them. And then that means something to some business application to take action on it. We'll send an email, generate a report, to make some type of decision based on the score that was associated with the individuals in that table. And then finally, to wrap up, let's go back to information catalog, back to my Michelin demonstration. And here is me searching on the Michelin information to find the tables that we created and also do a little bit of investigation on those tables and see if there's some place that I want to eat. I can then create a report or then go do some downstream analytics or just investigation of the data to see what might be the most interesting place for me to eat. So that's the end of the demonstration. Covered a lot of ground there, as you can see. And it was, a lot of different places inside Azure there. So really to wrap a lot of this up and put a point on some of the points, put a point on things that we're trying to say here is that connecting to data is one thing. That's great. And we have lots of different options to do that. But what is also important is what you do with it downstream. So one of the things you can do inside SAS is create a unified view of your data, connect all these sources that we saw, but then create something that's unique to your use case. And we'll get into the details of that very quickly. You can also start to do more optimization, and we talked about how we can move the processing to the data instead of move the data over to SAS. And then once you have connections to all those data, to all the data sources, you do need to have some type of governance on that. Who can see them? Are they appropriate for use, and so on. So no big surprise here. We saw this already. This is the flow environment new to SAS Studio, but this is where we can make sense of your data, connect all those different data sources, create very complex flows, and create a new view of that data that's available for others to build reports on or do analytics. And this is a really key piece of SAS Viya, but it starts to show how you can leverage all the connections we're making, connections to data in the cloud, for example, and do something meaningful with it. We covered the in-database processing parts just a little bit. If we want to move our process into Teradata, Hadoop, or Spark, that's a great thing because we can exploit the connectivity and use that to actually move the code to the data versus moving the data to our processing environment. So it's really important. And that's not too different from the way that SAS Viya works. And anyway, we have these in-memory tables called CAS tables on our CAS server environment. And the in-data processing actually works hand in hand with that because you can parallel load very quickly into SaaS's environment where you do need to bring data to SaaS to do some very powerful number crunching on the analytics side of things. And then I mentioned in passing earlier that we do have the ability to connect to different file types. It's a little bit different from our connectors, but it's also part of the data management story. If I have data available in a file storage system or an object storage system in the cloud, like Azure Data Lake Storage or an S3 in AWS, I can get to those files, manipulate them, bring them into the SaaS environment, and do the same kinds of things that I can do with the data that might be coming from a relational system. And then we saw information catalog as well. Now that you have access to all this data, that's great. You can do all kinds of interesting things with it, but it also can get out of control. So information catalog gives you this governance layer to understand how much what your exposure is to the data for potential misuse. So we can tag personal information and other sensitive information. We can show you how many tables, who's accessing it, when was it last updated. All these interesting things about your data so that you're taking the right decision on how that data is being used downstream. So the job of our developers that work on connectivity never ends. It seems like every month, if not every week, there's some new data source. And so our engineers are always adding new features and adding new connectors or new SaaS access engines. So there's a lot that has gone on in the last 12 months that just sort of summarizes it a bit. In the top left there, you see we've added SaaS access to Yellowbrick, to Spark, to Pi. We've added new features to existing engines like single sign-on integration to Azure. I mentioned that briefly for things like Postgres and our SQL Server connector. And then we always need to go back and, particularly for cloud sources like BigQuery, add additional capabilities to do things like bulk load or manipulate data in a different way that's over and above just reading and writing data from a traditional SaaS access engine. So we're always doing more work, always validating our access engines against new variants and creating new engines routinely every quarter. So ongoing work there. In a similar way, for the in-database features I mentioned and for our ability to manipulate data in CAS, same kind of story. We have to stay up with the latest things all the time, and we added scoring accelerators to Cloudera's CDP platform recently, and also scoring accelerator at Azure Databricks. So that lets us score, take our analytic models and score data inside those environments. And that's really important, as we've heard about keeping the data where it is. And then SaaS does have our CAS in-memory tables, and oftentimes you need to manipulate data there. We can parallel load very quickly data from any of our sources into CAS. And from there, we may need to do other interesting things. We may need to parallel load files of type Parquet from Azure Data Lake Storage, put them into CAS to do processing. And so we continue to have to add new features to enhance the way that we can move data very quickly and get it to the right runtime so that users can take advantage of all the different connectors we have. They got to get access to the data to use it. So in summary, really, I just want to leave with you the fact that our job never seems to be done from a connectivity standpoint. We are always on the lookout for new sources to connect to, new features to add. And we know that the biggest hurdle for most of our customers to get to the cloud is what to do with the data. How do I get the data there, or how to connect to the data from the cloud to my on-premises environment? In SaaS, it already supports the vast majority of the sources that you want to connect to, whether that's on-premises or in the cloud. And our assurance to you is that as you're making that journey and as you're ready to make your first move into the cloud, and maybe you're already there, that when you're ready to run the things that you run in SaaS for a really long time on premises, when you're ready to move to the cloud, SaaS is ready with our connectivity there right with you so that you can pick up where you left off as you make that move into the cloud. Thank you.